This morning's reading is from the New Testament, the book of Luke, verses 1 to 11. Once while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw two boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, Put out of the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of the fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. Here ends the reading, and may God bless these words to our understanding.
I was looking at the bulletin this morning and thinking, what if I was somebody who didn't speak the Christianese Christian language? And this was like my first time at this church, and I looked at the bulletin and was like, oh, these people are fishing for people. It's weird. Is this on? Yes, okay. I think I hit the button. Please join me in a spirit of prayer. God, guide our reflections this morning, that we may hear the words that you would have us hear, that we may feel the weight of discipleship as the disciples did. May we feel equally called to that which you prepare and equip us for. Help us to live into love that inspires action and actively brings about salvation as it can be experienced from one person to another. Amen. How humbling it must be to be a professional fisherman and come back from a night of work with nothing to show for it. These waters referenced here as Lake Gennesaret is the Sea of Galilee, and being about 13 miles long and 8 miles wide, there should have been no lack of fish to show for it, or to be caught. Being the native waters of Simon Peter, James, John, and all of their fishing buddies, you better believe that they knew the good spots, they knew the species they were after and what it would take to catch them. They knew their boats, the water, and everything about the funny weather patterns that are known even to this day to randomly strike this body of water. This was their domain. Fishing was their task, their livelihood. They were out there doing what they had done maybe every night for who knows how long. They were doing what they knew how to do, and yet there was no return. They had fished all night and caught no fishes, which I do know is not the plural of fish. There was no knowledge or techniques that they had at their disposal or in their toolbox that could change this reality. And I think this is a good point for jumping in. Before I even get deeper into the text, I want to call our attention to the fact that while this is the call of these fishermen to become fishers of people, fishing for fish was nothing new to them. And I see a parallel here that speaks into our context. I can't tell you why they caught no fishes. In all actuality, we all have our off days. Maybe that's all this was. However, for professional fishers to come out of an all-night fishing venture in their own backyard, having caught nothing, seems strange to me. And maybe that's the first lesson that Luke wants us to learn. That we can be doing the same thing for years and years, and at some point, we may come to a point where we have to admit that what we've been doing just isn't working, or isn't quite working as well as it used to. And maybe this is a message to individuals, maybe it's a living and sacred message to churches in our current context, maybe it's just a message to me or to pastors, to preachers, to prophets, or maybe it's a message for all Christians in the world today, that as we engage discipleship, we might have to put down some of our old ways in order to pick up new ways. And I'm going to be really honest, I don't love saying that because it's a direct challenge to me, and it's a challenge to all of us. And it's a message that is bound to take us far beyond our comfort zones if we're to heed the call, which is scary. Back in the story, Jesus is once again encircled by a huge crowd of people, and he's got some wisdom to share with them. So in order to make it as accessible as possible, he hops into one of the boats and he has Simon Peter row him out a little ways so he can address the masses. And interestingly enough, Jesus' teaching, whatever he was saying, was not the central point of Luke's focus. Don't know why. Doesn't include the teaching here. We don't know anything about what Jesus says. We don't know how the crowd hears and accepts what he's saying. We don't know his tone or intonation, only that he did want to get everyone's attention, which he did do. And then he does something wild, something that may have even been a little offensive to these fishermen. He says, "Take me out there. Let's go fish some more." And I imagine that Simon Peter, John, and James looked at each other in confusion, thinking, has this man been paying attention at all? How do we break it to him the easy way? And one of them speaks up and says, well, Jesus, we've fished all night and caught nothing, but if you really want to see for yourself, let's go. We're managing Jesus' expectations so he isn't as disappointed as they are at having caught nothing. Note here the doubt of these fishermen, informed by their experience of having caught no fishes and the willingness to take Jesus anyway. There is no way that they thought there could have been any other outcome. There is no way they spent all night hitting their favorite hot spots, using the best bait lures and nets that they had, and then to go out 20 minutes later with some random man and expect something to be different. Despite their doubt, informed by their personal and professional experience, they were still willing to give it a try, though. They were probably exhausted and may not have wanted to expend the energy. You would know how much work it is if you've ever taken a boat out on the water, spent all night hauling nets, or putting a boat back into the water after it's been docked and unloaded. And yet, they were compelled to go along with what Jesus was asking for, and they didn't even really know him at this point. They had likely only heard the words that he had said from the boat that Luke didn't even think was important enough to include in the passage. And yet Jesus goes out with them and says, "Did you try the other side of the boat, though?" And if I were one of the fishermen, I probably would have gotten a little petty at this point. "Oh, did you try the other side of the boat? I don't know, did we try the other side of the boat? All night long, did we try the other side of the boat?" Of course. Who does he think we are? We know what we're doing. We tried the other side of the boat. But lo and behold, Jesus must have been onto something, because the other side of the boat was apparently the trick. And Luke tells us that their boats were sinking from the amount of fish that they were pulling up. Their nets were breaking from the load, and they had to call their buddies to bring their boats to help them haul everything in. And this is the point of transformation in the story right here. This is where they had to have really understood that whatever or whoever this Jesus character was, he wasn't normal, right? And then he says to them, you know fishing, and you can keep fishing, but we're going to change what you're fishing for. Come with me and I'll make you fishers of people. And I imagine they must have been bewildered and amazed because they dropped everything. They dropped their livelihoods, their culture as coastal fishermen, and in the case of James and John, their family, and said, let's go. If he can do that with fish, what can he do with us? And here in the Gospel of Luke, we have the beginning of the journey of the disciples. Traditionally, to be a disciple meant that you were a close follower of your rabbi or teacher. You lived with them, you learned from them, you followed their ways, and made your goal to become as much like them as you possibly could. The meaning of discipleship has lasting implications that are still important here today. The goal still stands that we are trying to be more and more like Jesus, who did good in the world and brought about a message of liberation and love. However, what we see here in this text may challenge us to go beyond what we have been doing or anything that we have tried before to be more like Jesus. I want to preface what I'm about to say with this little statement that I do love church. I love church. I've hardly missed any Sundays since I've been born on Friday and church on Sunday, and here we still are. I love many traditions of the Christian church, and as a Christian, I love performing these traditions. And as I learn more and more about the UCC, I've fallen more and more in love. I think church is important for a number of different reasons, and yet I feel as though this text is calling us into conversation to look at what we know and what we have been doing, and to ask what would happen if we were to cast our nets on the other side. I'm sure many of us have heard the research, the harrowing statistics that say churches are experiencing mass decline, and they have been for several decades, and the statistics that say people are leaving the church in droves for a number of different reasons. And I'm sure many can attest to the fact that we in the church love our traditions, and we really fear change. And from that has come the resolve to continue going as we have always been going, because it's what we know. We are experts at church, and we're certain that there's no possible way that we could be doing things differently. And yet I read a story where Jesus has taken a bunch of professional fishermen into their own lake and produced what they couldn't with their own devices that have been proven and known to work for them. And so I kind of ask, where do we fit into this story? Do we fit into all the characters? Can we see ourselves everywhere? And I wonder if sometimes we're the crowd. We definitely want to see Jesus. We've been following him around at a distance, and when he rose out in the water to address us all, we love to hear what he has to say. And yet this passage presents a dichotomy that maybe what Jesus was saying wasn't as important as what he was doing here. His actions here, not his words, are what incited these fishermen to become fishers of people, to become disciples. And I can't help but remember the old adage that says actions speak louder than words. We're happy and content to gather with our fellow fishers because we speak the same language, we hold the same knowledge, and we know how to make the fishing trip the best for us that it possibly can be. We're happy gathering in church week after week, being here, sitting in the pews, speaking from the pulpit. And while these things are good and beautiful, while these things fill our souls and provide much needed community, what opportunities could we be missing because actions are harder than words. And I believe words are important, and I believe the discipleship formation starts with words. But the discipleship journey is sustained by action. Jesus took them out and showed them something. And then the fishermen dropped everything and followed. To get others to join the discipleship journey, we won't convince them with our words, perhaps. We must use our actions. Many have been pushed away from the church by actions, but how many more could find redemption because they have witnessed the acts of Christ in you and me? How many more would be incited to journey alongside us if they could clearly see, not just hear, that we have a focused and tangible mission that is felt so deep that it drives us out of these pews and into the world to be active and devoted fishers of men? It sounds like I'm talking myself out of a job here, but I believe it's what we're being called to. Not just to be fishers of people, but to first and foremost learn to cast our nets on the other side and to see what beautiful miracle God may show us despite our doubt, despite our fear, despite feeling exhausted, that we can't make a dent in the problems of this world. To cast our nets differently, in hopes that God may reveal or display something so real, so powerful, so odds-defying, that we might be incited to passionately drop everything, pack it up, and go on the road with Jesus. And so, as I close out this morning, I'm presenting you with a challenge. But I'm also, and perhaps more so, presenting myself with a challenge and my colleagues with a challenge. As we are in the Lenten season, we have just entered Lent. We are entering a series of discipleship, having just finished a series on vitality. I'm thinking, what can we do collectively to begin questioning how we might ask God to show us how to cast our nets on the other side? And so after talking about it briefly, I'm going to ask, talking about it with Joe and Megan, of course, I'm going to ask that for the next 6 weeks, we engage what I'm going to call a campaign of prayer, but you can call it whatever you want. For the next 6 weeks, I just ask that all of us set aside time for prayer each day. It's an action that we can do both individually and together to engage our discipleship journeys. And it doesn't have to be long. You can start with 5 minutes if that's where you're at. And you can work your way up if you can. And focus your prayers on discerning how God might be calling you individually or Plymouth communally to cast our nets on the other side. Ask God to reveal new practices that will help make us and this church even more vitally devoted to the call of being disciples. So we'll bring this campaign back up a few more times for the next few weeks. And we want it to be a dialogue. We want to hear what God is revealing to you. If you feel stuck, that's okay. What's important is that you try. Reverend Joe, Megan, and myself, we are all here to support you in this journey if we can, and we're all going to be engaging this prayer as well. And also, if you're feeling stuck, I'll point you back to the beginning of the year when we gave everyone star words, words to help guide your discernment and your spirituality throughout the year. Look to your star word in reflection and prayer if you need something to jumpstart this journey for you. And if you don't have a star word, get in touch with Megan, because she'll get you one, or 5. My word is enthusiasm. And I think God probably has a lot to say about the interplay of enthusiasm, discipleship, vitality, and what it means to be fishers of people, if only I can sit down and listen. And so, to wrap up completely, I'll give just a brief word on prayer. And that is that prayer is a two-way street. We often do quite well at petitioning God. The challenge for many of us, including myself, is to sit in silence, listening for the words of God spoken back to us in response. However, this is a vital part of prayer, and should we do it, I have little doubt that God may spark a fire deep in the cores of our beings that will lead us out into the water where we can answer the call to become fishers of people. May it be so, and amen.